Have just finished 15th, their lowest position in the top flight since their brief time in what we'd now call the Championship in the mid 1970s. And of course, they hope to make the Champions League, and you spelt out the financial potential of making the Champions League in last week's or the week before's podcast, actually. But they were, after a dreadful Europa League final defeat to Spurs, that hope was extinguished. Now, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who, although he's only owns, I think, just less than 29% of the club, he's effectively running the club on a day-to-day basis at a board level. So there've been dozens or hundreds of redundancies. They've cut contributions to a club charity that supports former players, raised ticket prices, even ended Sir Alex Ferguson's ambassadorial contract, closed the staff canteen. And so Jim has justified that, saying, and this was in comments he's made both to the Overlap podcast with Gary Neville and to the BBC, saying that Manchester United, without these cuts, would have run out of money at the end of the year. And supporters hoping for a big summer of spending at Old Trafford have been reminded that because payments are now made on instalments for players, United have already spent £89 million on transfers this summer, including money on players like Anthony, who are no longer at the club. It is such a gargantuan mess. Could United really go bust?
But they can't go bust. Sorry, I should say they won't go bust. And they won't go bust because the cost of keeping them going is much less than the value of the club. And therefore, the club's respective owners, the Glazers and Jim Ratcliffe, who are themselves both multi-billionaires, would not be in their interest to see the club go into administration, because effectively they would lose more than they would need to put in to keep the whole thing going. Football clubs go bust when the owners and other potential owners look at it and say the cost of keeping it going is less than the value of the club. That's what happened at Bury, right? Which is the total amount required to take over Bury and sort out their debts was about £7 million. And the value of Bury was about £3 or £4 million. So there was nobody out there who was willing to do that. In United's case, that's just not the case. I mean, Ratcliffe overplayed for it, as often ignorant new owners do. But even on a sort of humble day, I would agree that the club's worth 2 to 3 billion, right? So you're not going to let the thing go bust with a debt of 800 million when it's worth 2 to 3 billion. That would just be crazy. And if you did
Ratcliffe, just so again we get the figures out there, he paid £1.25 billion for his stake. So that's just over a quarter of the club, isn't it? So that would value United more like 5 billion.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Obviously, one has to sort of bear in mind when looking at things is that you've got what the asset would be worth if it was healthy and break even, right? And let's call that 5 billion. But then if you're being sensible, you have to take off the near 1 billion of debt. That's 4 billion. Then you have to take off the likely losses over the next few years as the thing gets sorted out, right? That takes it down to 3 billion. And that's why I say it's worth 2 to 3 billion, right? Because you're not taking it over in a state where it would be worth its full asset value. And I think that was the naivety of Ratcliffe and perhaps the arrogance of Ratcliffe, a man who's been very successful in a totally different field. And this always, as I go back to time and time again, this is the problem with football, is people who have been successful in other things assume that their genius will translate to the football boardroom before they've actually had any knowledge of football. If I was to say to Jim Ratcliffe, having been on the board of 3 clubs and having during that time been successful all 3 clubs, I think I've had 5 promotions now and no relegations, and I was to say, I'm really good at this football thing, Jim, I want to come and run your petrochemicals business. He'd look at me as if I was totally mad. He'd say, well, you've got no background in petrochemicals. And I'd look at him and go, right. I have as much of a background in petrochemicals as you do in football, mate. Now that's not entirely fair. I know his brother was running, Nice for him for a few years, so he does have sort of some background, but not hands-on. And at the moment, he's having to get hands-on because if he doesn't get hands-on, nobody will. So let's just swap a few ideas about what their numbers actually are, because there's some debate about it, right? It looks like the current level of debt looks to around 750 million. Is that the number that you're working with?
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like the current interest payments on that debt is about 50 million.
Yeah.
But rising. And it looks like the annual loss rate is around about 100 million.
Yes.
Right? Of which 50 million is debt repayment.
Yeah.
Right. So now is not the time to revisit the old ground that we have done before with Chris Blackhurst of how that debt happened in the first place as part of the leveraged buyout of United by the Glazers all those years ago. But that's basically the majority of it does relate to that on a net basis, right? So they took it over with 600 million of leveraged debt, and the thing currently is 750 million in debt, right? So broadly speaking, that's about what's currently owed is pretty much still the original principal on the purchase of the club by the Glazers all those years ago, which obviously was a disgraceful deal. I think we can all agree on that. But nonetheless, it is a fact of life. It was allowable then. It will not be allowable under the football regulator, but it was allowable then. So where they are right now,
just to clarify those figures, Charlie, and I'm just double checking. Yeah, United's total debt stands at 731 million pounds plus 300 million pounds in transfer fees that are owed. Obviously, they will come in staggering installments, in staggered installments. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, right. Which means they've got around about $1 billion of debt. Right, around about. So effectively, Ratcliffe finds himself in a situation which I found myself in at Sunderland, where you have this massive engine just eating money. The revenues which were expected when that engine was put together are no longer there, right? In his case, it's the money that you would expect from the Champions League. In Sunderland's case, it was the money that you would have expected from being in the Premier Leagues, the TV deals, and we're talking about similar kinds of money. 50 to 100 million, that type of thing. You've got people inside the club who have been there a long time. In some cases, were originally good employees, whether they be players or people behind it, but perhaps have become worn down a bit by failure over a long period of time. You've got players who should never have been recruited in the first place. You've changed managers so often that you've been recruiting for totally different systems and managers and styles over a long period of time. So you've got this build up, as you say, of players who you are still paying for, but who have actually already left your club because they didn't fit in. That's a horrible feeling, is effectively paying a player or paying for a player not to play for you is a peculiarly unpleasant feeling that I'm very familiar with. And then you've got a sort of culture behind the scenes that becomes very political as people point the finger at various people and scapegoat, etc. And gradually the thing becomes very sort of nasty and political and toxic. Again, this was true at Sunderland. So Ratcliffe's come into this situation, and he must have been aware of this because somebody like him hires the most expensive accountants that you can find to do the due diligence. He's not going to go and spend $1.5 billion without his accountants crawling all over it. But probably the bit that he has underestimated is the cultural problem, because that's not something that's measured by accountants. So he's looked at it and has thought, right, me coming along will be a breath of fresh air because the fans want not to think about the Glazers, and I'm not the Glazers, but and that I think to a degree sort of happened. I think he was sort of welcomed in the first place as a home sort of hometown boy, etc., and all this type of stuff. Secondly, I'm an experienced businessman who knows how to cut, so I will get to work on that, and I will have my people get to work on that. And thirdly, I'm basically just a good leader and I will bring back leadership to a rudderless ship. And that also will be right. This would have been his prognosis. And once I've done that for 18 months or so, the club will start going back in the right direction. Right. That's what's happened here. Now, what he's found is it's not as easy as that in football. You've got the full glare of the media on you all the time, particularly at Man United. You've got people within the organisation leaking against you. I had it at Sunderland. He's got it at Man United all the time. And every single little thing you do, however justifiable, becomes the topic at the very best of public debate, and at the worst, constant criticism, and even worse than that, abuse.